Okay, so I was working on more weapon breakdowns like you all have been requesting, but a patch hit with some weapon changes. Some of this stuff is relevant to my last few weapon videos, so let's quickly and slightly belatedly go over the significant changes here. First off, Shard Diffractor with a couple of changes. Endothermic Explosion is now named Plasticrete Catalyst. It blows up platforms faster, 1 second instead of 1.5, and destroys platforms more consistently. However, it now forces you to start recharging once it causes an explosion. That's a downside, but reaching the blast so much faster does make using the explosions rather than keeping the AoE boost going easier. It now costs a minimum of 13 ammo to reach the explosion rather than 20. My numbers in the last video were also slightly inaccurate, so here's the updated plus fixed numbers on the explosion. 300 damage, 3.5 meter radius, 1 second of shooting to explode. In general, you probably want to just go for the explosions now, rather than the boosted beam AoE. You get them faster and cheaper, and it's harder to avoid doing anyway, so just go for it. That's perfectly fine since everyone likes blowing stuff up, though you should consider taking friendly with this. Also, they fixed Dazzler module. Alright, then the Coilgun. Moved some Trail DOT from the Tier 5 Electric Trail upgrade to the base weapon. Okay, so this is pretty significant. Before, the Electric Trail did 3 damage per tick, and the base trail did 2.5. 1 damage per tick was moved from electric to base, so now Electric Trail does 2 damage per tick, and the base trail does 3.5. This actually means you do very slightly more DPS with Electric Trail than before, since the base trail ticks a little bit faster than the Electric Trail. However, the bigger difference is when you don't take Electric Trail. The base trail by itself used to be 11.11 DPS, now it's 15.56. This makes taking the other Tier 5 mods more reasonable, although Electric Trail is probably usually still the strongest. Reduced the base charge speed slightly, and increased the bonus of the Tier 1 charge speed upgrade. This change is actually tiny. The base charge time went from 0.8 seconds to 0.83 seconds, which is an almost unnoticeable difference. The charge speed mod went from plus 140% to plus 150%, which in combination with the base charge change is again, almost no difference. Significantly increased the effect strength and radius of the Tier 3 Fear mod. So now it has 250% fear power and a 5 meter radius around the trail, which fears things in a very wide range, but it's still kind of bad compared to the stun mod because you don't want bugs to get scared and walk out of your trail. You want them to hold still in your trail and die to the damage over time. Increased the explosion damage from the Tier 5 Necrothermal upgrade. The explosions from this are split between explosive and fire damage, and they also do heat equal to the amount of fire damage they do. It used to be 80 damage total. Now it's 140, so it was almost doubled. The prerequisite to get this to work is still awkward because a lot of bugs will just die to the fire, making it kind of overkill, but this is still a lot better than it used to be. The reload penalty from Reatomizer has been removed, so now it's a clean. I still don't know when I would actually want to use Reatomizer though, but it's a buff. Significantly reduced the damage penalty of backfeeding and reduced the ammo bonus slightly. So backfeeding got a lot more useful. It went from minus 50 damage to minus 20. The penalty was more than halved. The ammo boost was cut a little too, but it just went from plus 360 to plus 320, so it's not very different. Penalty is much easier to deal with, and you can hit relevant breakpoints a lot easier. So this is pretty okay now. The Boltshark. Moved some of the reload speed bonus and ammo switch speed bonus from Tier 3 Stabilizing Arm Brace to the base weapon. This is good because it means it's easier to take increased projectile speed instead of just always taking Arm Brace. Personally, I'm still probably going to be using Arm Brace, but it's a lot easier to justify taking the projectile speed mod instead now if you aren't very used to how the projectiles arc. As for special bolts, both taser and chemical explosive bolts had their ammo increased. Taser bolts went from 10 to 12, and chemical bolts went from 7 to 9. Both went up by 2. Which of course is a bigger deal for chemical bolts at their lower amount. The duration of both also went up, especially on chemical explosive bolts. The base duration of tasers went from 9 to 12, and the duration of chemical bolts went from 8 to 14. But the increase on tasers is honestly a bigger deal, despite being a much smaller duration change, because with chemical bolts, you normally want to kill the bug right after debuffing it, so you don't miss your window to blow up bugs behind it. Significantly increased the explosion damage from an enemy killed while affected by chemical explosive bolts, and changed the damage type to explosive. Weirdly, this doesn't actually seem to be implemented. Chemical bolts still do 140 damage, and it's still poison damage. This might just be an oversight that will get hotfixed in the near future, or maybe this will get changed along with a later patch. Fixed taser arrows electric arc, not damaging the enemy which the arrow is stuck in. This change means that when a taser is stuck in an enemy, and another taser is nearby, the enemy will take both the proximity and beam effect at the same time. Also, if you shoot the same enemy with multiple tasers, it can take the proximity effect multiple times, plus the beam. This does a lot of damage over time, and a lot of slow. With the combination of this and Taser Bolt's synergy with magnetic shafts, this is pretty clearly the best single target special bolt now. And Banshee bolts now take fear resistance into consideration, which is to say they now work properly, inconsistently versus most enemies, and not at all versus fear immune enemies like bulks. So, I myself will not really be using these much, but obviously this is a good change. Wave Cooker. Moved some shot width from the base weapon to the Tier 1 concave lens upgrade. Apparently the base shot width is down from 80 to 60. It's kind of hard to actually tell in-game though. Like, this is objectively a nerf, but I don't really feel it that much. Reduce the effect of the Tier 3 temperature amplifier upgrade. Again, this is strictly speaking a nerf, but I don't think this mod usually had much impact anyways, so I don't think this is a big deal. Reduce the ammo bonus of the Mega Power Supply overclock. This one is more significant, but it's also the nerf I understand the most out of these three. The writing was kind of on the wall for Mega Power Supply, with both an enormous ammo boost and a good rate of fire boost. The funny thing is, it's still a large enough ammo boost at 100 that unless you really want one of the other overclock effects, it's hard to pass up. That said, I think this should have come with a buff to the gun's base ammo to compensate. Those are all nerfs to the Wave Cooker, which I think some people might understandably find hard to swallow. But the next set of changes coming up I'm personally very pleased with. They're all changes to Blistering Necrosis. So, weak point bonuses now apply when shooting Blistering Necrosis blisters. If a boil from Blistering Necrosis is on a weak point that gives a higher damage multiplier than 1.5x, which would normally be the multiplier of the boil will copy the higher weak points multiplier. Damage transferred from shooting blisters is no longer dependent on how much health the blisters have left, which also means there's no more cap on how much damage they can transfer at once. So there's plenty of little details in how this thing works in general. I could probably make multiple more videos about Blister Necrosis by itself. A couple of relevant things include how if a target is frozen and then gains a boil, the boil inherits the frozen status, or how power attacks against these things are great now that the damage isn't capped. But boils were always at least pretty good for increasing Driller's own damage. The main benefit from these changes is that now there's no chance of you screwing over your teammate by spawning a boil that they then hit and do less damage than normal. Whether or not that happened frequently before, the inconsistency was frustrating, and seeing a hyper pop shot hit a boil and do almost nothing immediately dealt critical mental damage to any team player type drillers. With these changes, you don't have to worry about any of that. Boils just benefit damage, end of story. It's a substantial boost to not only the power of Blistering Necrosis, but also how good it feels to use, since you don't have to worry about possibly inconveniencing your teammates. So that's the changes to the new guns. We've also got some small changes to old guns as well. None of these are big, so let's just run through them quickly. On the Zukovs, conductive bullets went from plus 30% to plus 33% damage bonus, and gas recycling now gives plus 6 damage instead of plus 5. On the Stubby, a bit of the Tier 1 Electrify chance mod and Tier 2 Recoil Reduction mod got moved to base, making them now plus 25% electric chance and minus 40% recoil, respectively. Drax base ammo and ammo mod both got reduced by 50, which is a minor but weird change. Not quite sure what to make of it. Also, shield battery booster got 50 more ammo, and thermal exhaust's overheat penalty was lessened a bit to plus 0.8 seconds. Finally, Hurricane's Tier 1 blast radius mod went from plus 0.6 to plus 0.8, a modest increase, and Bigger Jet Engine went from plus 33% velocity and plus 100% turn rate to plus 60% velocity and plus 125% turn rate. And that's it. Some pretty significant changes in a small patch, honestly. There's some changes I don't quite agree with, but they're sandwiched by very good changes, so I can't really complain. The changes to Blistering Necrosis are great. The changes to Taser and Chemical Bolts are also good, and I think in general, the Shard Diffractor platform overclock is easier to understand now.